So you may have noticed that earplugs were being handed out. Little theatricality, perhaps, but if you're sensitive, put them on. Hit it. That's my day job. Okay, you can take your earplugs out if you like. In a strange way, it's kind of non sequitur with what comes next. And so I'm going to tell a story about my life before getting involved in Mythbusters. Let's see, I grew up in Indiana on a farm. I decided to get a degree in Russian. Then I moved to the Caribbean and got a captain's license and became a charter boat captain. Now, all of that is also pretty nonlinear. And the thing was that I had gone to school and got a degree and decided to take a break. And I had become fond of sailing in lakes in the area around the university, and mostly small boats like Hobie Cats and things. And I was a little frustrated sailing around in circles, and so I decided to learn how to sail on a real ocean-going sailboat. So I did a little research, and I went to the Caribbean, and or I found out rather that the Virgin Islands, and this is a map of them in the Caribbean is one of the best charter boat sailing areas in the world. So I researched that, and I went there. I ended up in Charlotte, Amalia. Let's see if that works down there. And I had intended to get a job on a sailboat and as crew and learn how to sail that way. Well, as it turned out, a week after I got there, I had my own boat. 6 months later, I had my captain's rating, and I was a dive master. And I spent a couple of weeks outfitting the boat. It was serviceable, but well used. This is Dulcinea. And so I wanted to take it out to a trip, fixing it up a little bit. I called a friend of mine from Indiana who's a physicist named Carlos. And he flew down, and we took off through the Virgin Islands, intending to explore them. And let's see what comes next. That's Carlos. He's quite the character, and we outfitted the boat, and we took off. Now we intended to go through is that it? Yeah, this is the Virgin Islands. The thing about the Virgin Islands is that it's a cluster of lovely little islands, and you can go for a half an hour or an hour or two and end up in a calm little cove and just drop anchor there and stay there. That's why it's a popular spot. And it's relatively calm because of all the cluster of islands around it. So you can find a safe and calm place to anchor. Now, we went right through that, and we decided to end up going here to the furthest one, of course, which is called Anegada. Now, Anegada was best known for its horseshoe reef. Oops, back. Which is right there. It's almost as long as the island. And Anegada was notorious for shipwrecks that would get collected on that reef, because as you can see, the water is quite deep all around it. But this reef, and in fact the island itself, is rather shallow. It's the highest point on the island is 28 feet. It's the only coral island out of the whole chain. And the reef is barely visible from being on the water. And the story was that shipwrecks would collect there, and it had collected quite a few over the centuries. And the natives would sit out on the tip of that island in their dinghies, and when they would see a boat run aground, they'd run out there and loot them. And so we decided to go right for the middle of it, of course, and check it out. Now, on the dark blue side on the right of the screen, that's deep water, and that's where the ships would come in. It was where the reef was the most dense, and so we decided to come up on the lee side, which is on the opposite side, and where it's a little lighter blue and shallower. As we approached, we saw a bump, and we got closer, and it looked kind of like a wreck. We looked on the charts, and there wasn't any indication of a wreck, because usually they're indicated, so we assumed it was fairly new, and we made a beeline for it. So the way these reefs work is they collect around the edge that formed that perimeter before the deep blue area, but on the lee side, they're a little more spotty, and still there's a lot of them. So we found as we got closer to that wreck, we had to be very careful maneuvering among these coral heads, which were often feet away from the boat. It was relatively shallow, so putting an anchor line down meant that you weren't necessarily going to spin around very much or very far, and it was calm, so we decided to stay there for a few days and explore the wreck. Now, I had brought a small plastic dinghy from Indiana with me that was barely big enough for a couple of people to ride in, so we got in that thing and paddled over to the wreck to explore it. The thing about the wreck was that the deck was facing towards the incoming swells from the prevailing winds that would come in from the east in that blue area. And as those swells would hit the deck of the ship, which was mostly wood, it would pressurize the hull, which meant that every few minutes there was this kind of ominous groaning sound that came out through the hawse hole on the boat, on the tip of the boat where the anchor line's supposed to go in. So we're rowing up to this thing, and it's all very strange. And keep in mind, at this point, I'd never actually been out on an ocean-going sailboat before. I bought the thing and did what I thought I should do to it to get it prepped. And I figured between Carlos, the physicist, and I, we would figure it out. So we're there, and we're anchoring on this thing, and we found as we got closer we could snorkel around it, and there was a fair amount of the boat that was out of the water, but you couldn't get to those rooms. You had to dive down under the boat and through other compartments to get up into some rooms that still had air in them. So we did that, and because it was inaccessible to most people, there was a lot of stuff in them. And I, in particular, found the engine room and compartment, or at least the engineer's room. And there were a lot of tools and stuff in there. So, of course, I harvested those things and carried them out. That was, my treasure at my first sunken ship I found in the Caribbean. O-rings and, mechanical parts and stuff like that. So we loaded up what we could with the dinghy. We spent there a couple of days and basically enjoyed ourselves. exploring that wreck, and at that time, rum was about 89 cents a fifth for a bottle of it, and in fact, it was cheaper than bottled water. So, here we are exploring shipwrecks on desert islands, and life is good. Then things changed. We had, again, hastily put this boat together, and we did what we thought we should. I had brought down all of my worldly possessions from Indiana. They were on that boat. And, we had, I had installed an electric fridge. We had I had my LP collection and a stereo. This was 30 years ago. I was 27. And so, I had just the kind of stuff that you have, even, personal junk from my office and so on. Now, the thing was that the fridge was electric powered, and the boat had a battery bank that powered the fridge. It powered the plumbing in the kitchen or the galley and the lights and things like that. And I hadn't quite got the feel for how long those batteries would last. And so I left the fridge a little too long, and the batteries were flat. And here we were in the middle of this area where we had very carefully worked our way in among coral heads every 10 or 20 feet to get close to that wreck, and with no engine. I couldn't start it. And meanwhile, the wind had shifted and had started coming out of the opposite direction of the